Hello, everyone. My name is John Park. I'm with the Utah League of Cities and Towns. It's great to have you here today. I want to remind you that this town hall meeting is being recorded, and we have quite a, I think we have quite a lineup today. I'll go over that in just a minute, but I'd like to just first of all mention that we have this. This is the first of a series of 3 town hall meetings dealing with law enforcement. This is the next one will be held a week from today at noon. It's going to be on the importance of public safety related issues. We thought important that all our elected officials have a deep understanding of some very important and complex issues that we think we'll hear about in the legislature next week. And Chief Ken Wallentine from West Jordan is going to teach us about some of those issues such as garrity, qualified immunity, use of force, and what they mean. And we'll follow that up with, we'll have the 3 cities talk a little bit about what they are doing with their citizen involvement, whether it be a CAP, a community, anyway, any kind of community advisory boards. And then lastly, on September 7th, that won't be on a Monday because that Monday is Labor Day, we will be holding a town hall meeting on community policing and building trust with the BIPOC community and millennials. And we'll go over a little bit of survey results there, and then to hear from some of the members of our community. Susan, what else? Susan Wood from the Utah League of Cities and Towns. What other announcements do we have?
In addition to this great town hall series, we have another town hall Wednesday morning this week talking about the American, ARPA, American, what does it stand for? Somebody. John, ARPA.
American Relief Rescue Plan Act.
Thank you.
There you go.
We'll be doing that Wednesday. And then the big event coming up September 29th through October 1st, our annual convention, and that'll be in Salt Lake City. It's going to be a live event at the Salt Palace, and we will have discussions on trust in policing and police-related issues, law enforcement issues, as well as a whole series of tracks for different specialties in municipal government. We'll be talking about growth issues, housing, water. We'll be talking about communication with your residents and with your staff. We'll be talking about all sorts of issues that will affect you. So we would invite you to join us on September 29th through October 1st and sign up online on our website, www.ulct.org. John?
Okay, thank you. So the way we'll go today is, first of all, I will present a survey. I'll show you some survey results on recruitment and retention of police officers. This survey was done by our staff, Wayne Bradshaw, who is no longer with the League of Cities and Towns. He just, his last day was last Friday. And Representative Gwynn, who requested the information. And so I think it's important we go through that really quickly. And then we'll turn the time over to Nate Mutter. He's the Assistant Chief of Investigation. Nathan Mutter, I should be a little more formal there, Nate. The Assistant Chief of Investigation, Chairman of Law Enforcement Legislative Committee. LELC is what we call that, and they are the legislative arm of all the police departments within the state, whether it be on state level, sheriff's level, or in the city. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about some possible legislative ideas, and then we'll turn the time over to Chief Randy Watt, Chief Police of Ogden City, retired, who's still involved and still doing great things. But he's going to talk to us about things other than just retirement and money that builds a great police department. He's going to concentrate on building culture and morale and a good place to work within police departments. And then we're going to turn it over to Chief Randy Watt. But I'm going to introduce Chief Randy Watt of Parowan. Chief Mike Berg of Parowan a little later after Chief Watt is finished. So let me share the screen here, which is something that is going to be interesting. and get going on this slideshow. Is that showing everyone?
Yes, it is.
Great. How come everyone can see it but me?
I don't see the PowerPoint anymore. No, I
You
don't.
see it? Got it?
Yes.
There we go. Okay, this is, as I mentioned, a recruitment and retention survey. This was done over the course of the last few months. And if you notice these numbers, I'll go over this really quickly, but we got the numbers from URS about how many active members of public safety and fire there are, and they came back with a number of about 4,300. And we actually have over 1,000 responses. So this is incredible. That's almost that's 24, almost 25% of active responses. So I think the margin of error here is going to be incredible. We broke down the people we asked by age, ethnicity, gender, the size of their agency, the number of years of services, the type of agency they have, whether it's a police, fire, sheriff's office, works for the state. Actually, we had some respondents from UTA as well, and whether they're tier 1 or tier 2 employees. And these are the number of responses we have. You'll notice that for municipal agencies in tier 1, we had 714, and in tier 2, we had 469, which I thought was a tremendous response to this survey. We asked, one of the first questions we asked was, why in the world did you want to go into public safety? And interesting enough, the number one, we had them ranked 1 through 6, different questions. The number one reason people go into public safety is the desire to serve. And what that shows at the top there, that red line, is they just wanted to serve their community. And I think that that's really good. Over on the left, on the right side of that slide, you'll see that the lower the number, the more important it is to folks. And tier 1 and tier 2, the main reason they went in was a desire to serve. And tier 2, exciting work. That was number 2 for the tier 2 folks, and retirement was more important for our tier 1 employees. And so I found that interesting, kind of that little change there. But you'll see that pretty well they line up between tier 1 and tier 2. We also ask a bunch of our people if they plan on leaving public safety. And if they did, we put them into another kind of column and ask them why, or first of all, we ask them if they're plan on leaving their current job, I guess it is. We ask them where they plan on going. And so the blue is just combined, everyone there. The tier 1 is the green, and the tier 2 is the yellowish orange color. And you'll see that unfortunately, most of our public safety people that are leaving want to go to a different industry, non-public safety industry. That surprised us. Well, I guess it didn't really surprise us, but you'll notice also that a lot of them, especially the tier 2 folks, the number 2 thing for them was to be able to go to a different agency. And of course, the tier 1 folks, a lot of those are ready to retire, and so that was important. That was an important number for them, and that just kind of talks about the demographics. Obviously, they are a little older and have been in the system quite a bit longer. And so that's just how it lined up. This is by age how it lined up. And I think this is a little troubling that we're looking at our youngest folks, 21 to 25, where they want to go is to a different agency. But I think what's troubling there, if you look at this middle of this different industry, you'll notice that we're losing, or the people that are kind of the meat of our police departments, the people that are 31 to 35, 30, actually 31 up to 45. They're the people that want to leave and go to a different agency. And that's of course that's a little concerning to me, to all of us, I think, but it is what it is. And I just wanted to throw this in to show that this basically says that millennials have a tendency to jump jobs more than probably us older folks are used to. I just wanted to let you know, more willing to act on better opportunities. 36 report that they will be looking for a job within a different organization within the next 12 months. And that's just something that we need to kind of look at. Okay, if you're leaving public safety for the private sector, what are the reasons? What are the main reasons that you're leaving the private sector? And again, the most important number is the top one. The number one reason and the number two reason is the number one reason is higher wages. I received a email. We've received a few emails from city councilmen throughout the state, and just saying, you know, what's going on with police wages and what we have happening in police wages right now. And I think it's kind of started in Salt Lake Valley, that they're paying more, and they're responding. And I was talking to a couple of chiefs last week that's going to their city council to try to get more money because people are leaving public safety for higher wages. And you'll notice that the next slide shows if you're leaving public safety, rank the following reasons that are most influential in your decision. And the most influential. So on this one, the lower the number, the better. I probably should do this slide a little better, but the number one reason that they're leaving is higher wages. But you know what the number two is? The number two reason that people are leaving is the lack of support from elected officials. I think that's important for us to realize that it's not just pay, it's creating the culture within your organization that means something. And then the next, you know, there's a bunch of benefits, increased retirement, lack of support of administration, lack of support of community, and the way that public safety is shown in the media. They're kind of relatively the same, but the two most important reasons that people are looking at leaving are higher wages and lack of support from their elected officials. So let's move a little bit about why people are not leaving. What's part of the retention plan here? It says, please rank the following action your agency could take to help retain your employment. Again, the number one reason, and if you look at that is well over 50%. The number one reason would be to increase pay. And then number two is increased retirement benefits. I do want to note here, there's something that I think we all understand, but we never say, is that if we increase wages, we do increase benefit just by default, right? If you're getting 20%, at the end of the day, if you're getting 20% of your wages, if your wages are higher, you're going to get a higher retirement benefit. So the next slide is just kind of what they can do. What can your agency do to retain your employment? And approximately 50% of those increase pay to increase pay, increase retirement. So increased pay, if you'll notice, the first column is increased pay was their number one choice. The third column was their number two choice. And then the increased retirement, number one choice and number two. You'll notice if you add those together, that increased pay essentially doubles increased retirement, especially for the tier one employees. The tier one employees that, tier one employees are actually about a third of what's important. You know, I guess that's a here and now kind of thing. We want to get paid more. And this also shows that this is the exact same message. I always think this is a powerful question to ask in your a powerful question to ask in any kind of survey we do like this is, if you have $100, if you had $100 in new funding, where would you spend it? And again, where would they spend it? Both tier 1, tier 2 say they would spend it on increased pay. And the number 2 things that they would spend it on are increased retirement benefits. And you know, they do spread it across some other things like health benefits and training and better equipment. But I think what we're seeing out there with this escalation in our economy is that pay is really a problem. What do you post-safety retirement plans? There's people that plan on retirement in the near future. You know, some would like to go back to public safety law, but for the most part, they just want to, if they're going to go work, they're either going to stay retired or go work in another law enforcement, another non-law enforcement sector. You know, we talk a lot about maybe what one of the things we could do to help keep that experienced law enforcement officer engaged is to be able to get rid of the 1-year wait before they could go to work again for another public sector law enforcement. And we didn't really ask that question, but you know, I think that it's probably worth a debate, that a lot of the people that would want to go to the private sector, if they didn't have to wait that 1 year, if they would go look at staying in law enforcement. This also is a little bit troubling. It says, I would recommend a career to law enforcement, firefighting to my friends and my families. Look at those numbers at the bottom. This is, you know, it's 2 to 1 really. The number of people that would somewhat disagree or strongly disagree that they would recommend law enforcement firefighting to family and friends. I'm one that actually comes from a long line of a law enforcement agency. My father started in 1950 as a deputy sheriff in Tooele County, and I have a brother, 2 brother-in-laws, and myself that all started our careers in law enforcement. And that is something that from looks of these slides is just not going to happen. And I think what we see here is actually the younger people are more likely to recommend a career in law enforcement than a lot of our older folks. And this also is a very interesting, very interesting, and I'm going to toggle between two different slides here, but rate your overall job satisfaction within your agency, and this is kind of a personal. How would you rate your job satisfaction in your agency? What's your morale like? And then this one shows what this one shows what my morale is like. You know, there's someone agree that it's strong, but if you look at the second one, is the morale in my agency, those numbers are significantly lower. It's also interesting to know that in some of the agencies, and this is I'm sorry, I skipped over this one. What this slide is showing is that the people in the larger and the smaller departments have less job satisfaction. You know, we talk a lot about rural Utah and their ability to keep and retain officers, and this shows that their job satisfaction is much higher, 10% or so between medium-sized agencies, those with 11 to 40 officers, compared to those that are larger and those that are smaller. That's just an interesting thing. That's the extent of the slides that we have. I have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll end my slideshow and try to figure out how to take the screen away. I don't know how to do that. I'm still sharing my screen, right?
There it's
Not
not.
anymore. I got you, John.
There we go. Okay. So now I'd like to turn the time over to any questions on that? I don't see any questions in the chat room. You have any questions, please ask. Be glad to come back to them. Nate.
Hello, how are you, John?
Good, Nate. Thank you. Time is yours to talk about some perhaps some legislative solutions.
Sure. So you all just saw the survey that John went over, and you know, being within the field, I've either talked to people or I've felt similar feelings about the profession, especially over the last little bit, as it pertains to, you know, morale and public support and things of that nature. And so we as a group within the Law Enforcement Legislative Committee wanted to try and address recruitment and retention, because it seems to be an issue, again, especially within the last year and a half. To provide a little bit of context of my background, I came into law enforcement in 2002. I was a member of the Utah Police Corps. The Utah Police Corps was a federally funded program in the late 90s and early 2000s with the idea of recruiting college-educated police officers into the workforce. The thought there was provide a little bit of a lengthier training, provide some financial incentives, and on the back end of that, you had to basically promise to serve in Utah law enforcement. At the time, it was for 4 years. I've also taught in higher education for the last a little more than a decade, and so you know, with those two things in mind, you know, one of my thoughts my whole career is I wish the Utah Police Corps didn't go away, but the federal funding did, so of course the program did. And to address you know, potential recruitment issues, you know, we have to find different carrots of what will motivate someone to come into the field. With the money aspect, obviously that's starting to be addressed currently within the last few months. Agencies are starting to reevaluate and revamp their pay structures. To give you an idea, and I'm sure some of the folks on this call could tell you they started less than I did, but you know, I started off in policing in 2002 with I was getting paid a little bit more than $12 an hour. Now I had a wife to take care of, no children at the time, but I had student loans, I had, you know, all kinds of things that I had to take care of, and yet I was struggling to make $500 a week is what that comes down to, and I had to take overtime shifts to clear that. And so when we're talking about pay, of course, that's a huge carrot, but again, that's being addressed, at least here in the Salt Lake Valley, and perhaps that's spreading the ripple effect there. So one of the thoughts was to, you know, provide some sort of educational path that on the back end of a college degree, you would also be ready to be a police officer with a certification. So in essence, it's combining education with post-certification. The recruitment piece of that is, you know, we want to recruit 18-year-olds into basically to be interested in law enforcement. There are cadets, what's the program? The program's called where they have the cadets similar to ROTC for military, but they have that in high schools for law enforcement. The different agencies, I believe, host that. And that would provide a huge recruitment pool of 18-year-olds. Now, you can't be a police officer here until you're 21. You can, as of recently, work as a civilian in a jail. And I'm not sure if that's localized to Salt Lake County or if that's a statewide thing. I can't remember exactly the wording of the legislation that was passed a couple of years back. But I believe you have to be you have to be 19. So we can't even hit that 18-year-old workforce because they can't be in law enforcement. So if you start off at 18 years old with trying to recruit these folks, why can't we recruit through education? I believe there's a lot of benefit to having a college-educated individual come into law enforcement. You're talking about the critical thinking aspects of things. You talk about maturity. You talk about writing. A lot of things that you can coach and mold during a 3-year span, that 18 to 21 year range. There's a lot of things you can do to prepare kids essentially for a career in law enforcement. Now, one of the ideas is, upon graduation, there are no student loans. Student loans are a huge burden countrywide. We have what some consider to be a student loan crisis. So if we can provide this educational path to become a police officer via some sort of scholarship type program through the state, we can help those coming into the field to be ready to be police officers without having to worry about student loans. Again, trying to think outside the box and trying to dangle carrots in front of folks, potentially that is a good way, to do it. Now, that being said, similar to my time in the Utah Police Corps, we would probably want to throw in some kind of mandate that they spend X amount of years in Utah law enforcement. And in that way, it is a, quote unquote free education, but that education is being put to use here in Utah through dedication into the law enforcement agencies throughout the state. We're still trying to, look at this, how we can put it together. There is a similar program offered in Weber State. We're going to learn more about that soon, through Director Stevenson and Post. But if we can, figure out a way to recruit folks and provide education for folks and preparing them to become police officers, and educated police officers, we believe in the long run that can help professionalize, the police force in a way, and also provide opportunity perhaps to those that may not be able to afford or have the opportunity to go to college. And again, it's just another way to bring people in. Again, this is just an idea we're trying to work through and put together. We're in the early stages somewhat, but the discussions are being had, and potential curriculum is being looked at. So that's kind of what I was asked to talk about in a nutshell as it pertains to recruitment and retention, and something we're trying to take a look at through the Law Enforcement Legislative Committee on how to address those issues. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I don't know how you want to run this, John, but
Yeah.
I will leave it back to you.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that we'll see some other bills, legislature dealing with the retirement and the 1 year thing that I talked about earlier, and some of those things that probably we'll see come down the pike. There is a question in the chat room, but I'd really like, if it's okay with the person asking the question, I'd like Randy to go first, and maybe it's something that we can just kind of turn over to the panel and maybe talk about the bidding war that's going on. So let's go to Chief Randy Watt. Chief Watt is probably the only guy that was even close to starting Post Academy when I did in 1980. And but anyway, he's been there, done that. Retired police chief, Ogden City. Chief Watt.
John, you're a youngster. I started in 1979, August 27th, 1979. But if you remember, back in those days, we had 18 months to get to the academy. And when Ogden finally decided they wanted to keep me and sent me to the academy, I was in my 21st month of service
Wow.
with the Ogden Police Department. For those who don't know me, I spent a total of 39 years with the Ogden Police Department. Retired as chief in this past January, 4 years as chief. There was a 5-year gap in there, which is why the 1979 to 2021 might not add up right. But I was gone from the agency for 5 years. So we want to talk a little bit about culture, but I'd like to point out a couple of things just so there's a clear understanding. And that is you look at that survey, you look at everything that was on that survey, and it talked about what would keep officers there, what might have attracted officers originally, not necessarily what attracts them today. But please don't make an assumption that better pay and better retirement equals better output in terms of police work. That just means people hiring and people staying. And in fact, one of the major problems that Utah law enforcement is facing right now is that Utah law enforcement agencies, particularly across the Wasatch Front, have moved into what we call passive policing. And the only thing that has ever successfully reduced crime, which is, no matter who you poll, that's a high expectation on the part of law enforcement's customer base. The only thing that's ever reduced crime is active policing. And that is where officers are out utilizing the authorities they've been given under the law in a measured and constitutional way to interdict crime. Passive policing is the exact opposite, is doing as little as possible so as to reduce risk. And I'll talk about risk here in just a moment. I'll give you an example of active versus passive policing. When you call in because you see a peeping Tom looking in your daughter or granddaughter's window. All you can identify is that it's a male and wearing a black hoodie, sweatshirt, and he runs when he sees you. But you dial 911 and you call. When active policing is underway, not only will the responding officer go there, but he'll go there quickly. But not only will the responding officer go there, other officers will move into the neighborhood as rapidly as they can. If they're doing lesser activity, they're going to move in the neighborhood as well. And they're going to kind of set up in a perimeter, and they're going to watch, and they're going to look for people on foot. They're going to look for people wearing dark or black hoodies. And if they see someone, they're going to, as they are legally allowed, they're going to stop them and they're going to ask them, what are you doing? Who are you? And those are the kinds of things that have an impact and effect in reducing crime, in identifying people that are committing these crimes or that need to be locked up. In passive policing, what's going to happen is the officer's going to come take the call. He's not going to hurry. Fewer officers will come into the area because they don't want to risk a confrontation. If they stop somebody, they risk a confrontation. They risk someone denying their request for identification or denying their request to stop. And if that happens, given the current environment, then the situation can be turned into an incident. And one of the greatest fears of police officers today is to be the next incident on the news and in the paper. Now, law enforcement officers, they want to stay alive and they want to go home to their families. But that's dying on the job is not the biggest fear. The biggest fear is financial ruin and or reputational ruin for themselves and their families by being dragged through a long media process or trials and so on. Now, why do I mention this? Because I want you to understand that besides pay and benefits, there is the overall environment within law enforcement. If you'll notice on those slides, it mentioned that a number of officers felt that they were no longer supported by their administrations, by their political leadership, and or by certain sectors or segments of the community. And when we add those together, they create a dynamic. And when you add it to the media play, you create a dynamic that can impact recruiting. A young person has to decide, is that worth, is going into that career field worth it in terms of how I and or my family, particularly my children and others, will be recognized? And might it be the wisest thing, or should I choose another career? For those that are in the career, that came into the career, that same question exists. If I stay, what do the risks increase? Or if I move to specific assignments, narcotics, SWAT, street interdiction, do I increase the risks of becoming the next incident? And is it worth it to me and my family? One of the things that's happening that didn't happen in my generation, younger generation of police work, but it's happened to me as chief, as I've interviewed a number of people on exit plans, is that there were a significant number of officers who said, my wife has asked me to do something else. My wife can't take the stress and the pressure. And so that's part of that overall environment. Now, when it comes to pay is always a consideration. Back in my generation, I didn't know what Ogden paid until I got my first paycheck, because it didn't matter. That's not true today. And the retirement system has changed 3 or 4 times through my career. Several times for the better, one time for drastic worse situation, which greatly impacted and affected the working environment. And there are moves to attempt to do that. I know Nate, LELC, and others are working on ways to improve the retirement benefit and get it back to where it could be more equitable to stay long-term careers. There's also a generational change. And that generational change, this latest generation, thinks more about what's on the immediate paycheck than they do thinking 30 years ahead, what happens in terms of a retirement. And there's plenty of data to point out the differences in generational thinking. So there are 2 animals that we deal with. First is recruiting. How do we make it, how do we provide the type of environment that is attractive? And in this day and age, how do we overcome the negativity? That plays a role. The bidding war, and I'm going to address that question, John, if you don't mind. The bidding war is a result of an attempt to keep officers in the field, to keep the numbers inside agencies high enough that agencies can handle the calls for service and ensure some level of service. Because in that war, the pool of new candidates over the years has shrunk so dramatically, the number of people who actually would like a law enforcement career, and the number who are staying to full retirement has shrunk dramatically over time. So what we are doing is we are literally cannibalizing each other's agencies, but the only means or mechanism to protect our agency is to raise pay and try to keep more people and gain from other agencies. As a police chief, I would much rather hire what we call a lateral hire, which is someone who's already certified, already in another agency, is a proven product in law enforcement, has a successful career and a reputation going, and lure that person over, then start brand new. At Ogden, it costs me about $100,000 for a new recruit to come in the door and go through the training program, go through the academy and the OPD training program. And I don't begin getting a return on that investment for 3 to 5 years. And many of the younger officers were leaving in 2 to 5 years. And because they're so young, that additional 25 cents to $1 an hour is a big deal. And it's very hard to compete against. The other thing that shows up on those slides that John talked about is morale. And that's a challenging thing every day for a leader. But morale is an interesting dynamic. As we think about ourselves individually, on any given day, my job is a terrible place to be. On other days, it's a great place to be. Morale is very individual. It can be affected or impacted by a lot of outside influences. The stresses that are going on in the other parts of my life can bleed over into the job. So, you know, in law enforcement, there are actually 5 true indicators of morale. Those are things like absenteeism. Those are things like turnover rate. Those are that can be measured if a police chief is watching. There are 5 primary things that we look at, all the way to what we call internal sabotage, where people are attempting to defeat the system from within. And you look at those, I looked as a chief, I had the measures in place to look more at those 5 things than I did to ask people about their morale, because it changes so dramatically in various times. There was an IECP study done about 15 years ago that asked sort of the same questions about morale. And what they found was that 2/3 of the people enjoyed the job they worked at, 1/3 didn't, and they worked for the same agencies. So for every 2 people that were happy, there was 1 who was unhappy. And they worked for the same supervisors and the same police chiefs and the same administration, the same agencies. So that's why morale is a very individual thing, and it is very difficult to deal with. What is a big problem with morale is when morale is in the career field in general, where it's not limited to one agency, but it's in the whole career field and it crosses agencies. And that's the things like loss of feelings of loss of support by the community, feelings of loss of support by administrators, feelings of loss of support by political leaders. Now, that's why they have such a detrimental effect on the industry. And John, I'll leave it at that. I'm hoping that answered some of the questions. If not, we'll deal with them as they come up.
No, great. Thank you, Chief Watt. And so basically the answer to the question was, what is the solution to the ongoing bidding war among neighboring jurisdictions? It makes it beyond difficult to plan and budget when mid-year jurisdictions are throwing money at the issue and taking officers from one city to the neighboring one. We have literally created a statewide bidding war. And I think that Chief Watt answered a lot of that. You know, when I was city manager at Cottonwood Heights, literally, I think 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we felt that we could recruit people and not really get into a bidding war, because we thought the culture of what we had, you know, we always said, you know, you come to work for us, you have the opportunity to do real police work because we're not as busy, and those kind of things, that people are just going from call to call to call, and that's all they're doing. But right now, we just have a finite number of people in police work and a finite number of people that want to be in police work, and we have much more demand than we have supply. And I'm optimistic enough to believe that there will become a time that it's neat and cool to be a police officer again. And it's something that people want to do, but we're not there yet. Oftentimes, there's not support from elected officials, from press, from the various communities, and it's kind of twofold as far as I'm concerned. Is one, just kind of the normal cycle of what we go through, but 2, I do believe that we have to learn to reach out to various communities and things like that better than we're doing. But I believe that there will become a time, but I'm sorry, right now, I do not see, you know, I just see salaries escalating because there's that finite number. It's just simply supply and demand. There are some things we've talked about, like maybe in some of the calls that we have that maybe deal with mental health, suicides, things like that, that we're not tying up police officers as much by introducing those kind of experts into the system. But that will reduce the number of police officers perhaps we need by a little bit, but they still need to go on those kind of calls. And so anyway, that's kind of the answer, unfortunately, to that question. Moving along, Chief Berg. Chief Berg is the Chief of Police for Parowan City, has been there since January 2018. He also serves as a Region 1 Vice President of the Utah Police Chiefs Association. He's been a school resource officer, child crimes investigator, detective, SWAT team operator, so on and so forth. And you know, it's interesting. One of the things he did was he was a death investigator for the Utah Office of Medical Examiner for the last 12 years. And actually, that is something that to me seems like a negative. But he talks about how He was able to interact with the families, give family true love and compassion in their darkest moments, and it's been very rewarding for him. Chief Berg never would claim to be an expert or highly educated on the topic of police mental health. However, he knows that his expertise on this topic is because he has lived a life. He has lived with PTSD and the horrors that come with it, and the way it affects his family, and the way it affects his entire life. And through proper mental health care and learning lifelong resiliency skills, Chief Berg is stepping out of the shadows and becoming a champion for officer mental health and wellness with a desire to push it statewide. I was looking for someone to talk about mental health with police officers, and people just say, you got to reach out to Mike Berg, and he definitely is the one. So Chief Berg, you can, it's yours.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't say that I'm a champion in anything, and did my screen come up? Oh, maybe not. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, is the screen up now?
It's starting to.
All right. So
There you go.
Interestingly, I didn't choose mental health as something that I wanted to do. It kind of chose me. And at some point within our career, we talk about this younger generation of cops. That's what they want. They want to learn about mental health. They want to have resources. They want to have resiliency skills, and they need it. I mean, we have young officers here that they see a child death and they need a week off. And in my generation of policing, you went right back to work, and we still go back to work. And so all that gets stuffed away somewhere, and at some point it comes out. Unfortunately for me, mine came out a few years ago, and I didn't notice it was coming out. My family, if I can figure, there we go. So my family's the one that figured it out, and I got the ultimatum. And the ultimatum was, you should get your head fixed. And it's a stigma in policing. It's very taboo to talk about. And I think that the taboo needs to go away. And so as our family got healthier, and it's not just a police officer thing, it's the entire family that has to deal with that type of stuff. And it's not trauma related to 100,000 calls. It's not trauma related to just one call. It could be trauma related back to a childhood thing that portrays itself out in your policing aspects due to the stress. I think that if Chief Watt and I know Chief Adams is on, and there's a lot of chiefs that if they would have known prior to becoming a chief, the amount of worry that they would have for their officers, I think they would rethink being a chief. The amount of worry that comes with the officers and their families is tons. And it's not while they're at work, because we train them, we give them equipment, we trust them. It's when they're off work that you worry, especially the younger generation. So what you see on the screen is the reason for me. And part of that was my wife was willing to say, we got to figure something out. And so through different avenues, we tried to figure it out. And what we found out was there isn't anything in Southern Utah that will help. We have a few counselors, very few, and they're busy, very busy. And part of getting trauma treatment going in policing is the culture. We are very distrusting people. We are very suspicious of things because our entire life is lived in a conditioned yellow type mental capacity, even off duty. The day you strap the badge on, you become different. And I try to explain to new officers now coming in that the day you swear an oath, you are different. You will think different, see different, everything's different about you. And you're going to withhold information from your family differently. Meaning there's lots of things I did in my career, death investigation, I love it. It's a very, very satisfying, gratifying position for me. And when you continuously see that, especially when we talk about children and small communities, people you know, and it's tragic, that stuff gets put away in your brain. And the brain doesn't care if you're happy, but the brain cares if you're alive. And so it's going to stuff all that stuff away until you figure out how to bring it out. And it's not easy either. So what I decided was part of the Utah Chiefs Association is trying to develop programs that better our police agencies across the state. 109, I believe, police agencies around here. That's a lot of dudes to be able to teach something that's important. So do we want them to get PTSD and have to go through the trauma treatment, the expense of all that? Or do we start now and treat them or teach them just wellness and resiliency? If we can teach them something to do right then and there after a call, 5 minutes long, and it gets them back in the moment, their brain's not going to stuff that bad information away in the limbic. Their brain is going to process it right then and there. Therefore, we have a better opportunity, better chance for their future. So pushing mental health resiliency across the state is important. It's a huge task to try to do in Utah. And it's very vast, from the very first one being stigma. There's still very much a stigma within Utah policing that mental health is not talked about. Very few chiefs are going to sit up here and tell you that they had PTSD and that they did trauma treatment. I'm okay with that. Part of it, right? If somebody's not willing to say it, then again, we're just adding to the stigma. So we've got to learn to get rid of the stigma and the culture. All the way up to when we get these police agencies accepting and providing skills for their officers, who does that? There's not enough mental health, there's not enough therapists that understand the police culture available in the state. The Utah Fraternal Order of the Police has teamed up with us. They're very much proactive in mental health and resiliency. And in fact, they're so proactive, you don't have to be a member. They will send a therapist to an officer in crisis, any officer, retired, FOP or not, anywhere in the state of Utah for 4, and then they'll provide 4 visits to a vetted counselor. In their process, they've been able to vet less than 20 counselors in the state. So when you have 4,900 cops and maybe 1,000 of them already have something dwelling and probably need a little bit more of a complex type treatment, and then you have another 3,000 cops that we need to teach resiliency skills, who does that? And so we have to figure that out. We got to get rid of the stigma. It's just the bottom line. We have to be willing to be vulnerable and open. We have to be willing to say the word mental health. We have PTSD, all the crazy stuff, because for so many years we haven't done that, and it's caused and continues to cause discomfort and problems within local agencies. And then you have to deal with culture. Police culture, we're the worst about trusting people. We're the worst about somebody coming in to tell us what to do. And then on top of it all, the chief makes it mandatory that I'm there. Well, Kevin Gilmartin does a great speech about the chief says you're going to wear a certain kind of hat. And if you fight about that and you argue with the chief, eventually you're going to wear that hat and get time off, right? Because we're a paramilitary type organization when it comes to organizational structures. So within our culture alone, we have problems saying the word mental health. We have problems believing that there's a mental health issue, but more importantly, we don't want to be labeled with mental health. And somehow we have to figure out how to do that. And I believe that starts at the top. I believe it's chiefs leading out, saying it's okay to talk about mental health, and we should be talking about mental health. There's lots of chiefs across the state of Utah that are doing that. There's lots of chiefs that are looking for the resources, looking for the way to fund it, which is why it's important that we talk today. But most importantly, we have to have policy in place that protects the officer. Right now, across the state of Utah, different groups are attempting to get internal affairs investigations that are unfounded complaints that should never be given out through a grammar request. Could you imagine if an officer's mental health history is given out? And there's ways to protect that through some Utah laws. But the agency must understand that, but more importantly, they must have policy in place that protects them. Until we do that, the police won't trust, right? The cops won't trust that it's okay to talk about their mental health or get treatment. Because the last thing we want to do is take a positive and have it turned into a negative because of an anti-police rhetoric or culture out there through the media. And it's okay to, as a police organization across the state of Utah, we should be talking about mental health in the public and in the media, but it needs to be in a positive manner because there's no other way to develop the trust with the officer if we have just all this rumor going around outside of us. And then lastly, funding. It's just not cheap. We had a good conversation with Governor Cox a few weeks ago in a law enforcement administrators meeting with him, and he understands it, right? Each agency understands it. City managers, you guys are key in developing funding sources within your agency to be able to present to the city council, our elected leaders for a vote. Keep in mind that an EAP program is great for the 90% of your city. It's not great for cops. I can tell you cops aren't using your EAP. Maybe the cop's wife about a child and some counseling there maybe, but you know as well as anybody, you don't get solid numbers per agency or per division within your cities. Cops are not calling an EAP when they need help. They're calling friends. We need to train those friends in peer support. Peer support has to happen within our agencies. And that peer support is totally driven on the fact that we need to understand what the problem is and then get them definitive care right away. We just can't wait anymore. So it has to be funded. And when we're talking about funding, we're talking about general funds. We're not talking about using insurances and things like that, because again, we have problems with grammar requests and FERPA and different things. But if we use general funds, then the Utah law that's currently in place protects the officer and it protects the city as well. So there's a lot, it's a huge ask. For an agency that hasn't started anything, it's a really big ask. I'm gonna use Chief Colleen Jacobs with the West Valley Police Department. She's a leader in this. She has developed an in-house therapist program, and it's not cheap. 200 cops and civilian staff have availability to an in-house therapist at their police department. They have developed a culture that talking about mental health is okay, and it's accepted. And interestingly, in talking with their therapist, the officers are gladly going and seeing them now. Where before, when they first went to their first meeting with her, they wanted to search her office and look for cameras, right? So again, that's that culture that we have to break through. If you do not get somebody that understands policing and they come in and teach a class, and it's a mandatory class for them, for the officers to be there, they can ruin an entire department just based on not knowing the culture. There's lots of groups out there that want to help. There's lots of groups out there with great programs. We're currently working with a couple of them to help them understand what the cultural needs are within a police department and how they might break into that, and how they might be able to develop different types of programs or different ways that they present it. So I want you guys just to see this. This is like the major thing that you see that causes stress for cops. It's the critical incident stuff. Look in the middle right there. Policeman attacked car with baseball bat. That was 2 days ago in Parowan. And then he lit himself on fire as he tried to blow the cops up. Crazy stuff. But that doesn't affect our cops usually. That's kind of excitement, even in the younger generation. But the one right below it that says Utah retirement system, very much affected. The one to the left that says law enforcement reform, very much affects our younger generation of law enforcement officers. During the legislative session last year, 2 of my officers, I had no idea they knew about qualified immunity, and they were very heavily following it within the legislature. And that's that younger generation of cops. My generation of cops, we pretty much just get up, go to work, do our 10 hours, 12 hours, we go home. These young guys understand it. And so we need to be very proactive legislatively as well as local leaders, talking with our local county and state leaders to develop sources of information and trust between leaders to be able to get your information out. So what are the benefits of wellness programs? You will have reduced discipline, you have reduced misconduct, reduced sick leave use, reduce medical benefits, the use of benefits for going to the doctor. But more importantly, you will have a morale within a police department that is happy. They're just happier because they don't have things to stress about. They don't have the anxiety. They don't have the jumpiness, all that comes along with it. So the hard stuff, how do we fund it? But first, we got to get rid of the stigma. The number one thing is get rid of the stigma. As leaders, we can start that today. We can start talking and having conversations. But the next biggest thing is how we fund that. And so Utah Chiefs of Police is trying to develop a program that we will get out to all the chiefs and sheriffs and Utah AG just with an idea from beginning to end. And here's a couple different ways of going about it. We're not coming in to tell any chief how he has to do it. We're not coming in to tell any chief that he's doing it wrong. Guys that are doing something is better than nothing. But we've got to start from the beginning with a full-blown multi approach to how we fix the problem. And that goes all the way to the Utah legislature, putting money into our colleges to recruit therapists, people to become LCSWs that might have already a background. So unfortunately for me, my 20-year-old decided she was going to do that. She's lived a front row seat to this stuff for 20 years, and she'll be good at it. I don't like it at all, but she'll be very good at it. That's the kind of people we need to be recruiting to get counselors that are available, that understand our culture, and more importantly, care about policing. So stigma and money, those are the two big things. As elected leaders, you guys can do this. Just show your support. Let your chief know you're there for him, and when it's time to go after that money, you're with him, right? I love John Kennedy. If you don't want, if you don't like the cops, call a crackhead. Yeah, perfect. But now we got to tell our county and our state leaders that that's what we're doing as well. As elected officials within our cities, we need to be up, we need to be talking, and just sitting back and saying, well, I can't affect change. That's wrong. You can affect a lot of change. So I can tell you right now that every cop in the state of Utah is doing it for the right reason, whatever that reason is to him. To me, I always wanted to serve my community. That's bogus. I didn't. My wife said we were having our second child. We didn't have medical insurance. 2005, 2003. And now I love it. I love this career. But without fixing the problems that we have of guys my generation in policing, and providing the new generation of police officers with some resiliency type based skills, if we don't do that, we're failing as leaders. And that includes all of us, city managers, everybody. So I just encourage you guys to be open with your chiefs, have conversations with them. We're going to get them as much information as we can, and just understand that no matter what, cops are going to bring the fight to themselves. That's how we do it. And that includes the mental health fight. And so we need our elected officials and everybody to be on our side with that. So if there's any questions, I think that's it. So.
Great. Hey, Chief, thank you. We talked about a case study that you shared with me a week or so ago about there is an economic basis for taking care of this. I mean, we've already talked about retention. Mm-hmm. Retention is important. We've talked about, less sick leave. We talked about less turnover, less problems within the department. That can be quantified. And you mentioned a case study. Do you have that? And something you could send me that I could make available with the as far as this group is concerned?
Sure. So I think one thing that we talked about was the West Valley City therapist actually made a statement, and she made the statement in a very public meeting, and it made a lot of sense. And she said that the police officers, we're talking, and also I want our elected officials to know, like, I'm very specific to police right now, right? First responders are important, but the fire guys, I mean, they get PTSD, but playing Nintendo is rough. Like, I mean, it's tough for them. But first responder mental health is the key, right? I'm talking very specific police, but police are the most underserved population within public safety when it comes to mental health, when it comes to retirement, and when it comes to wages. If you think about the overall view of that. And when we're paying $45 an hour in the Salt Lake Valley, and I appreciate Mayor Wilson from Cedar City's question there, because I've already threatened Chief Adams, a friend of mine, that you better not take any of our guys, right? We're 12 miles north. But it's happening in Southern Utah now. And it's $45 an hour up there, and we're just barely hitting the $30 an hour mark here. And so it's vastly different. That all provides stress to our officers, every ounce of that. And so this younger generation of officers pays attention to that kind of stuff. And so I'll get you that study so you can send it out. And it's important that as elected officials and city managers, you guys play a big role in the chief's ability to push something out to his agency. And it's very important.
All right. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story, and I'd like to thank all the presenters today. We'll get this information to Susan, and Susan will make sure that it's available. The slides are available, and the information that Chief Berg is going to send. So thanks to all the presenters, and thank you for taking the time to tune in. Thank you.